Smack the record.
Nice,
I chose a different sci-fi background for us because I'm locked in
nice,
it.
nice.
Um,
Awesome, awesome.
yeah, I met a couple people over on the Facebook side. I think I told you about the guy who had Eidolon in his name. I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, but I think he's definitely in this like meta space. That's pretty exciting. And then I met another guy who's actually not who doesn't live like geographically that far away from me, and he's like very much in this idea of like he calls it protopia, like just the idea of like positive visions for the future, embracing technology, and some of that stuff. So that's really good. And then I also, there was a guy who I met from the Game B space a while ago, and he just now got back to me, and we had a good talk. And he actually, his project is actually really thriving. Apparently, he's under they go by Meta Game, and there's like
Yeah,
three
yeah, I saw
thousand.
that.
Yeah, yeah, you saw the tweet. Like this guy,
I saw the tweet, man. Yeah, that was awesome.
they got like 3,000 people in their Discord. I mean, they're pretty.
Yeah, I put them in one of my to-do lists on Twitter just because they're nice ahead of the game too because they're already focusing on the metaverse.
Yeah, they're ahead of the
And
game and they are the game.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the gamification aspect is really cool too. Definitely, yeah, that's awesome. I'll talk to them later because that's a really good idea. I also sort of feel like I don't like to talk about like a side project since I'm already working on Shield Wall. Like, you know what I mean? Like no one wants to like hear that the founder of a project has like another side project, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? But that being said, like I do have like some ideas for like metaverse, like that I thought about, like sci-fi wise. Like it's such a big puzzle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I can could contribute a little bit on that front. It would be interesting. Very interesting.
Well, the way I'm thinking about it is like it really, in a lot of ways, is the same project and just like it's the same overall effort, and that's what's like really exciting to me. This is something that's kind of emerging more for me recently, which is that before so, like with the Natural Institute, for example, and the larger kind of sphere over there has been called the dissident right, and it's a lot more like politically focused and a lot more like conservative and stuff. Whereas, like this other kind of like larger movement that I'm starting to see is like this meta movement or whatever you want to call it, and it's a lot more like forward thinking, apolitical, technology embracing, and this kind of stuff. And I'm seeing a lot of similar threads between like what you're doing, what I'm doing, what metagame's doing, what Game B's doing. So it's kind of exciting, and I think yeah, like the metaverse kind of ideas fit right into that. So I'm down to hear about it. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about whatever's on your mind and what you're developing.
Yeah, yeah, and also too, like I love the game, you guys, because I remember listening to their podcast, the Stoa, way back in the day.
Yeah,
And they certainly helped me a lot on my journey as well.
hell
Um,
yeah,
and two, also like their whole like search for like religion that is not a religion. You know what I mean?
yes,
That was very interesting as well. I saw things like a little differently. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
But still, they help. They're definitely a part of like the like my Mimetic journey and all that Brahmin journey.
Yeah, and they've been running for
Yeah,
a while since like 2013 or
they
so, and
have.
some of
Yeah,
those. Yeah, I've heard like Vervaeke and Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger and Eric Weinstein, I believe, some of the key folks over there, and then Jim Rutt, I believe, still operates over there. So there's a lot of good guys in that space, even though the project itself is kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's fizzled a little bit. Like I've gone to their website and their Facebook, and I'm kind of just like jumping in, same like I did for NLI, like hey, what's going on? How can I help? Who's leading the show? And it just seems like it's kind of like a ghost town to an extent, but it still has done a lot of good, and it still is a place to network. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, like each it's just standing on the shoulders of giants and stuff. You know what I mean? Like each step is a different rung on the ladder. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
um, they help like the next generation of creators, and then we help like the next generation of creators, and then they help. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, there's also like yeah, like there is like like a certain bit of like calcification. You know what I mean? Just like especially like um after like a certain movement or something like rides its wave or whatever. And I understand that there is some of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With their movement. But I mean, like I say, they played a good part, you know what I mean? In inspiring a lot of other stuff that's coming up, and that's the main thing. That's what it's all about, really.
Yeah. One thing I was gonna say is like I found out about Game B and NLI at about the same time, and I was kind of like dipping my toe in both waters to kind of get a feel for it, and I kind of got a feel that like like I said, the game B is more apolitical or even like somewhat left leaning, whereas like groups like an a lot more right leaning. And I thought about it in some ways. Like I remember saying something like, I would rather interact with right leaning people and try to get them to be a little bit more accepting of left leaning ideas. But having interacted with them so much, I'm kind of like, well, I'd rather, maybe I want to try the opposite. Like, and that's not to say like the far left leaning. That's there's not really any point all the same there. But I do feel like these kind of spaces like that, it's more apolitical. It's a little bit more, it's just like forward thinking, zoomed out a little bit. Like you're not like super zoomed in on like whatever the contentions of the current day are. They're thinking about longer term visions and stuff like that. And I think that's just really good. I don't know if we talked about it, but a big thing that was emerging for me was the problem with the labeling of the dissident right. Like I didn't think that was a good label, and so there was this idea of the sensible center. And so again, that's what I feel like that's kind of what's happening. And I'd rather like work in this like central space and try to incorporate some of the right leaning ideas rather than try to get these guys who were just like almost infinitely far right to try to balance it out a little bit more, because ultimately when you're talking about the Overton and you're talking about the larger society, it's obviously concentrated more around the mean and the average and the center. So yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. You know what I mean? Like the whole political spectrum. Like I sort of like I just see things like radically different. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like like I sort of see things as like because I've dropped like my cognitive load down to like shield wall, which is like 100, like it's like a meta cult about like 100 cult leaders or whatever, like whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's like platoon like sort of like level. You know what I mean? Like so I have like a very like operational mindset, but at a lower level.
Right.
And so everything like I'm always just and plus like because it has so much novelty, it's not only that like I see things like those two things kind of combined to like make you see things a little differently.
Right.
And like what that sort of manifests as is like I myself and Shield Wall and like the team romanticism movement I'm trying to get going is like we only have to falsify against the ends of the spectrum being like science on like first principles on one side and then magic and paganism on the other side.
Right.
So we have to falsify against the ends, but all that stuff, all the philosophy stuff in the middle, like we don't really owe them anything. And it didn't really influence a lot of my work very much. You know what I mean? So that's sort of like where like I want to play around a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for me, it's also like who do I feel responsible for? And like the reason why I can't fit in with like a lot of these political groups is like I just personally as an adult like feel like I have an extra sense of loyalty to just like the creator cast in general, like
Right.
as a cast. And the big problem I have here is like a lot of creativity overlaps with mental illness. You
Mm.
know what I mean?
Right.
And so like me as like a creator, like or the Guardian as a cast,
Mm-hmm.
like I have to make sure that like other factions like understand that. You know what I mean? And that they like and like forget about the empathy stuff, like it's more like the actual sympathy. You know what I mean? Like and like also understanding like it is a gift as well. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um, so it just gives me a different perspective because on one hand, like I have a lot of room to maneuver because I only have to falsify against two things,
Mm-hmm.
which is magic and science. But on the other hand, like because I do actually feel a responsibility to like a certain group, like Shield Wall, the Public Commons, and the Creator Cast, that load of responsibility then limits my options. And so it's I don't know, I see things a little differently. Just it's just from my level, you know what I mean? Because my cognitive load is lower.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
because full accounting, you know what I mean? Like it's like it's too much for a homeless poet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like so you have this thing where it's like philosophy versus like a business. You know what I mean? Like eventually you have to kind of reconcile the two. And yeah, I don't really know. It's a little bit of a tangent. I know it doesn't really like it's just like going back to the beginning. It's like I find it hard to relate to the political spectrum. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just because my own like operational like mindset means I just need a lot of nuance. You know what I mean? Because my like the allies and the factions that I want to negotiate are really diverse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, one, like I said, one reconciliation to the political debates and a lot of the problems that come with operating in that sphere, namely it's so disagreeable and emotional and so forth. One solution is to kind of zoom out a little bit, is to be like, let's like rather than like being like hyper focused on like what's going on in our society and the problems in politics and this kind of stuff. Let's just like zoom out a little bit. Let's think about the larger picture. Let's think about the larger spectrum of history and future casting. And then, that's one of it. And then there's also just operating within other realms, right? Like, just I'm focused on my business, I'm focused on my projects, I'm focused on this stuff over here. And the good thing is that usually most everything relates to most everything else. So it's like, just because you're not like actively investing in what's happening politically, that doesn't mean you're not affecting that. Like, for example, if
Yeah.
we just focused on shield wall and building that up, well, ultimately what shield wall is trying to do, between just being a cultural institution, developing developing a constitution, like mapping out like basically a vision for society in general, that's obviously going to have political ramifications. So, and that's a problem.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it is like it is limited to like the like I don't know how many adolescents it's going to need to be, but at the end of the day, like there is going to be a hard cap. I don't know if it's like going to be like 12 or 21 or like max like 100 or something. You know what I
Right,
mean? It's going to be tied to shares.
right,
So like the whole reason why like it's at the end of the day, it's a group that's around the size of the Dunbar number. You know what I mean?
right,
Now each Adola may have their own fandom, which could be like dozens or hundreds or thousands or millions or whatever. It depends, different levels, right? Um, but at the end of the day, like Shield Wall, it's not like a vision for humanity. It's a vision for like 100 bros and bras who want to work together in this egregore. You know what I mean?
right,
Um,
right.
like sort of like a meta cult for cult leaders, you could say. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm using that just because that term is really popular on Twitter at the moment. So
yeah.
whatever, I'll use
No, I
it.
like it. I love it. I love meta and meta cult. I love that. It's
Yeah,
funny because I kind of see the current iteration of the branding of like the natural order as being the same way. Like, obviously, the idea of like an order, like if you think about like an esoteric occult society, is not meant to be a populist movement. It is more so like a Dunbar number, like a brotherhood of
exactly. Yes,
whatever
yeah,
it is, like the priests, the creator class, who then to kind of support each other, and then they can then branch out from there. And so yeah, once again,
yeah,
I definitely
exactly.
think we're operating in the same space there. But um, I think yeah, it is interesting too, the idea of like, do we let individuals within this brotherhood, so to speak, manage their own populist entities, or is there room to also have a larger, like, umbrella, more populist entity? Um, yeah,
Yes, this is that can happen because but it's kind of like the concentric rings.
yeah,
Like it's yeah, like it's very easy to sort of like daydream about movements and stuff like, and it's very important for strategizing.
right,
But eventually, once you start to operationalize, it's just like, how do we get across this bridge? Like, how do we take like that little info bunker? You know what I mean? How do we get like this part of the battle space or whatever, of the info escape or whatever?
right,
Um, and it's just like the strategy versus the tactics.
yeah,
So like, just what I would say is like, I'm already building a larger, like the seeds of a larger movement through like the team romanticism movement, which I'm trying to um, build at the moment,
mhm,
which is like will be like a bigger umbrella of cross factions that I believe can be united. Um, and but I don't like to think about that too much. I just like hint at it because like that movement's going to need an officer corps. You know what I mean? That trust each other.
right,
And that's what I'm working with Shield with. You know what I mean? Like as like the vanguard of that movement. But it becomes like so even though I had that like down the line, at the end of the day, it's kind of like how do I like operate Shield like right now or like in the next 6 months or the year or whatever. And when I think that way, that's more tactically. It's sort of like, how do you bring 100 bros and bras together under a like a man or bud like order? You know what I
right,
mean? And work together and operate so they can all grow and help the public commons and help each other, and
Right.
yeah, and just grow their hypersocials together.
Hell yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's a good perspective to count. Like, we've got these, like, you've got different scales of how much our head are in the clouds, so to speak, or we're looking into the future or the possibilities, and then there's like, what are the next steps? Like, what can we do right now to keep it moving? And that's good. Um, One thing I'm thinking in that vein, because we're seeing like a couple of different organizations here, and individuals. Really, it's like a little bit of both, and so it's kind of a question of, I guess there's like some unification going on under like certain umbrellas, but then there's also like some federation, and there is some different expressions, which is good. As far as different missions and different brands and stuff like that. But it in my mind, it's still like manifesting under the same like meta movement or parallel movement, which is really good. Um, and so kind of a question, one thing to think about is within this like larger, let's call it a meta movement or parallel movement, like, where does, for example, where do you want, or where do you think Shillwall fits into that? Like, is Shillwall, the vanguard of that, or is it just, is the creative part of that, or is it supposed to be, is it capable of federating the whole thing, kind of being the total umbrella? Does that make if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Like, uh, uh, like I'll just say that like I don't know, and I just want to say that like the reason why is like my personal like feelings is um um like obviously I want to bring like any like I want to recruit as much as possible. You know what I mean? I want as many high agency and mid agency and low agency people. Whoever needs help or wants to collaborate. You know what I mean? Like I want to build it up, but also at the same time, like from the meta movement side, like I would almost say just like let's just say we're like a fleet of ships. Um, and like there's like the shield wall ship. Like I would say just as like let me like take like this small squadron of like three ships or whatever away from the fleet and like do my own like thing for a little bit and just like count on me to like help out over time. You know what I mean? Like incrementally over time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you got to remember, like Shield was founded. You know what I mean? It was founded like at the time was at a time of what I would assumed was like total globalism, like victory. You know what I mean? So I designed it as like a substrate, like a multicultural substrate to like build up a coalition to go after the globalists at their own game. A network state that can operate across borders. Um, and so I like now you can sort of see like the national versus globalism thing is kind of like reappearing again, and they're like going on to round two or whatever. And I understand like that's great for them. You know what I mean? But I don't see why I shouldn't still operate under my same strategy. You know what I mean? I guess you could call it like a game B strategy. Um, like I guess the question is like, do you want like a network state that actually like can go after the globalists? After going game. And by globalists, like at this point, like I see our biggest enemy as Disney. You know what I mean? Um, like to go after them, like from like a business sense and like a philosophical, metaphysical, and like aesthetic and cultural sense, like like I'm gonna like you're gonna need someone like me or like other like mentats or neurodivergents or like non-technicals and stuff and technicals, like who can understand like this like the complex asymmetrical cultural warfare that's going to take. You know what I mean? And like my just honestly from like a sci-fi writer who's like just used to being like way ahead of the game, like like I can't do it now because I don't have any money, but at a certain point, like I just want to like give orders. You know what I mean? Like any company or network state would do. You know what I mean? And like just like start uh like the battle and start making money and building all kinds of capital and like um and like operationally. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
It's just like it's you gotta understand it's tough for me like to think like a decade or 2 decades ahead and then I go to like another group, and they're groups I want to support and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like I want to be like a good ally to lots of different groups. Um, uh, but like they're so far behind. You know what I mean? Like um, yeah, it's just part of being sci-fi. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So one thing I was gonna say is like, obviously like the the goal to like be able to get, like have power and influence and money is like always key part of it, right? So it's just a question of how to get there. Um,
yeah, and it's also too like I mean like it's just the realities of like do you want to like take on like you know what I mean like some of these megacorps, you know what I mean, like it's going to take a lot of you know what I mean, it's going to take a combination of money and open source, you know what I mean, and like and hierarchy, and you're going to have you know as soon as you have hierarchy you got to have a smaller group, you know, and you got to trust each other, and that takes you know you got to work with your, you know what I mean, it's just like it's yeah
so
it's yeah it's tough.
So to go back to the one thing that helps me is to go back to the tri-functional, and like you've got again what we talked about, like the people trying to operate in the political sphere and what that entails. Like the funny thing is that like even groups like NLI, as politically focused as they are, like they don't actually operate in the political sphere. They technically operate in the cultural sphere because they're not like writing laws. Well, I guess they kind of technically are, but they're not like actually involved in the active political process right now. And then you've got like the business or the market sector, and it's like, well, none of us are really like have a successful business or are making money or have a monetary plan or even a product right now. So we're not really even operating in that space yet. So by process of elimination, we're operating in the cultural space. Like we're basically just building connections, building ideas, building brands. Just basically just trying to kind of build some momentum and build some community and a network that starts in that space. And that makes the most sense to me. And that's how I've always operated. And so I think that's kind of where I know that's where I am, and I think that's kind of where we are too. And we're trying to obviously like get more into the financial space, and we're in the market space, and we're trying to get more into the political and the power space. But it starts here. It starts here in the cultural space, I think. So it's just a question of how do we build momentum? How do we get more cultural? Like you said, culture war. But how do we just get more? How do we build our army? How do we recruit? How do we get more cultural leverage? How do we create art and brands and communities and events and projects that appeal to people, right? That's kind of where I'm operating, right?
Yeah, I agree. I feel the exact same way. My sort of thing is like, if I had the money, like you know, I feel like I could win like the culture war like really easily. The only problem you have is that it kind of takes like an alt-center culture. But when you do that, you basically just piss off everyone. And the only way to pull that off is if you have like a good cultural movement behind you that can bring all those like different factions together. You know what I mean? And so that's what I would go for. But like I say, once you go for that, once once you have like it's kind of like you know like this is an archetype obviously like in fantasy and sci-fi like the Jon Snows, you know what I mean, like oh like how are we going to unite like the Northmen in like the houses
Yes,
south of the wall, you know what I mean,
yes,
or like
yes,
who was a Valerian who took on the Huns or whatever, Attila, and he had to get like all those barbarian factions together and all the Roman factions together, and like
yes,
all of them had like separate factions going at it, and like
yes.
he had friends, you know what I mean? Like it's just like the realities of it, you know what I mean? Like once you start thinking that way, and then once you add a sci-fi spin to it, and
It's like Game of
you add
Thrones in space.
yeah, and also at the same time, like me as like a pleb, like it's impossible for me to lose touch with my roots. So there's always like, how's the public commons going to be helped from this? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, after all of that stuff, and then even after that, it's like, how is Shield Wall, like how our fandom's going to actually benefit from this too? You know what I mean? So it's like it's just a lot to think about, and yeah, it's also too like due diligence as like an influencer or like an info general or whatever you want to call it. Like it's okay, like if you go like if like you're a Roman or like ancient Roman like general and you go to the campfires and they're talking about how like Hannibal is a stupid idiot and like we should just go kick his ass tomorrow, you know what I mean, or whatever. Like that's fine. But as a general, like you have to do your due diligence and you can't look at him like that. You know what I mean? Like you have to respect like enemy capabilities too.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And so now all of a sudden, like you can't even hate the enemy side because you have to understand them.
yes,
You know what I mean? And so that distances you morally and ethically from your own. soldiers as it is. You know what I mean? And it's just, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's tough.
So I just had a really cool idea, and I'm probably going to make a visual to go along with this. But I just thought, because we're talking about like the center versus like the left and right of the political spectrum. So I was thinking, so um, if you have the left and the right, and then you also have kind of like a spectrum of like how I guess like not necessarily how intelligent people are, but like how aware they are or how like invested they are in what's going on, basically. So the majority of the population who is very low in like agency and awareness, they're kind of in the center just because they don't know a whole lot better. They're just kind of they're probably just like, this is the silent majority, or a lot of people are just kind of like they don't know. Like they may kind of they may be blown with the wind. They just kind of adapt to what everyone else around them is doing, whether that's more liberal or more right wing. But I feel like within the lowest level in the commons, there is some centrism. And then as people become more invested and aware and become agents, they typically start to polarize because they start to pick one of the sides. As they're building their worldview, it's usually like black or white, good and bad. I'm choosing this side, those guys are bad. So you kind of go from the center, and then as the awareness, you kind of split out. But then what you realize is that, okay, we're not getting anywhere by being like super polarized and operating on one side. So I think what happens as you get even higher in like awareness and operationalizing is you kind of realize you need to come back to the center. You
Exactly.
need to appeal to larger
Exactly.
audiences. You need to find a balance. You need to be diplomatic. And so I think that's where this like where we are and where this meta space is that reconverging. And so what's what we can do, this is like a pathway basically. Like people who are aware but polarized, we can help them find diplomacy and reciprocity and help them return to a more central diplomatic reasonable state. And then people who are low agency or low awareness, we can just try to start catalyzing them to wake up in general. And it would be nice if
Yeah.
we can keep them from getting polarized. But so this is just the whole spectrum and how we can start to get out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And also too, like it looks strange, even to like hypersexual, like my own fans in some way, just because like, um, you're baiting people into like reciprocity, but at the same time, um, like you want to do like the heroism thing for the public commons,
Right.
which means that um like the reciprocity, you want to sort of demonize those who can't reciprocity, you know what I mean? But like that on the heroism side, like you want to always like have the hand open, you know what I mean? You want to be able to bring people in, you know what I mean? Like I understand that this is a very liberal mindset, um, but like
No, I like
it goes
that.
back, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's also too like people who are suffering, like it's not their fault mostly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like this, to pull yourself up by the bootstraps thing only, like that's good in like a functional society, you know what I mean? At a certain point you have to um like this is why like I want to have like a little like heroism thing to self-sacrifice for the commons, you know what I mean? Like
Yes. Yeah.
and just yeah,
I think
but
you
not forced. It's not forced. You know what I mean? It's not like a communism thing. It's just like these are like our 100 hypersigils. You know what I mean? Like they'll entertain you. Like you know what I mean? Like they'll make this fun for the fans, but what they're actually like, but they'll actually like help like the public commons. You know what I mean? Like even just like picking up trash or you know what I mean? Like just like anything. Obviously, like I can think of like more advanced things. You know what I mean? Like
so
obviously, you know, but
you mentioned that before, and I really like that because reciprocity is obviously like you're reciprocating, which means that you're kind of like replying or reacting to an initial action. Whereas the idea of like the heroism and a lot of what I feel like you're picking up on, which I like as well, is that we want to be the proactive force. We want to be in a proactive positive force. We obviously don't want to be a proactive negative force because that's going to reciprocate negatively. So, but if we create these proactive heroism and proactive positive forces, um, then you know that will be reciprocated, and that will resonate throughout the chains.
yeah, and this is sort of like the dichotomy that I want to create is like the heroic liberalism versus neoliberalism.
Hmm.
And really, all the defining line is that you accept that liberalism doesn't scale. Like that's the only thing you have to do. You
Yes.
know what I mean? Once you accept that and you only enforce that noble homology, you know what I mean, the heroism comments on a small subset of people who have volunteered for it,
Yeah.
then you're not breaking any natural laws anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the only difference. Like that, this is why I think it's very important just to like drop the cognitive load down because I want to enforce liberalism. You know, I'm in a group of people, and I know that doesn't scale. You know, what I mean, because I want to go after the globalists at their own game. You know, what I mean, I want to build a counter multicultural alliance.
Wow. I just thought, okay, so I like that a lot. Like the idea of heroism, it kind of ties into
It's
it kind of ties into stoicism, and obviously the Hellenism, which I know is a big influence for you, and this idea of like taking responsibility, being proactive. You mentioned the shortcomings of liberalism and like libertarianism as well. It doesn't scale into the commons. And it gave me the idea that like really this is it's what we are experiencing and what we are helping to catalyze is really it's a kind of a new renaissance or a new evolution of the Western strategy in general, because the
exactly,
Western strategy up to this point has been very individualistic, and but now we've kind of come to the limits of that, of the scaling of the liberalism and the individualism, because we have been manipulated by people who could cooperate better than we could, and so it's kind of a challenge to the Western strategy to say, hey, we need to collaborate.
yeah. Well, it's criminal to force heroism on people who can't handle it, right? You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like I don't even like it. Like you know what I mean? Like I'm doing it because like I have like metaphysical investment as a founder.
Right.
But you know what I mean? It's tough. You know what I mean? Just like the endless daydreaming and the endless like aesthetic edits and the endless like networking and like all this, the stressors of thinking of the future and stuff like that. Like, and you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's just not. Yeah, like I say,
it's
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 just
so
it's
it's so powerful. I really want to continue to keep, in the way that like the institute, for example, always keeps a spotlight on reciprocity. I really want to keep a spotlight on like heroism, because that is just such a beautiful thing. Like this idea that like we've got to be those heroes. Like it's about like developing agency, empowerment, like creative, being proactive, like starting these chains. I mean, so many people just
exactly.
react. So many people are marginalized and they're just watching, but we need people like doing, and so yeah, I love that, and we will reciprocate for that.
Yeah, and like the big thing for me too is just realizing that um yeah, just like the selfishness of like the hyper individualism, like especially like especially in the Brahmin caste,
Right.
where it's sort of like they're hyper like anything like the weaker an egregore or an institution is, the more they critique it, but the more powerful it is, the more they let it go.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the megacorps, like they can get away with like cult like anything, you know what I mean? They can have like chants for their employees or make them do weird rules or like strange meetings or force them through like a whole bunch of programs and stuff.
Right.
But as soon as like a small like emergent Brahmin, um, comes up with anything, you know what I mean? It's the critics come out, and it's just because they themselves are scared of operationalism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sort of from my perspective, I sort of see like a lot of the criticism. So basically, well, if we had $1 million or just like a 100 VIP hypersigils or something like social proof, then all these problems disappear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we're just operating on the best heroism substrate. So it's I don't know, it's sort of like gatekeeping, but I sort of understand why. You know what I mean? Like because a lot of the like discourse online, it goes in circles. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they did disambiguate fictionalism to the precipice of operationalism,
Right.
but then they get scared and then they reambiguate all the way back to fictionalism again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's yeah. So it's like I don't mind. You know what I mean? But I just operationally I just can't afford to do that.
So, yeah, and I remember one of our first chats. We just like went down the gamut and like identified all these problems, like all these common problems that we're seeing with like whatever the distant right and the mostly the distant right probably, because I feel like the meta movement is actually a lot more collaborative, and that's what's exciting to me. But one frame that I want to come back to, and I was really pushing for it last time, which is that I see two major efforts, and they're kind of part of the same effort, but especially in our calls. One is talking about just how do we scale, like an actual organization like Shillwall, or how do we build this network? And then the other side of it is like the kind of like the fictional development and like whether that's like the actual like sci-fi world building and writing. Um, which as far as working, I think I resolved last time that it sounded like when we're working together, it sounds like more of like the first one, like just focus on the organization building. I know we haven't really got into like the sci-fi fiction world building. I don't know if that's something you want to collaborate in or if that's just your project. But I am curious between those two, which do you want to pivot and maybe go into the fiction direction, or you want to continue developing the like talking about organization, how we can build.
Yeah. No, like I always want to put like operationalism number one,
Okay.
just because the fictional thing, like I see that problem as either A being solved by one of the hypersigils,
Yes.
like maybe me if like no one else does it,
Right.
or more likely we'll just have dozens of hypersigils who have something like that as their specialty,
Right.
and so we'll have it covered across multiple genres.
Right.
So I don't really worry about the fictional. The main thing with the fictionalism is just I was partly inspired just because like concept stories, like threat casting, forecasting.
Yeah.
That's really popular with the megacorps. Like they have like think tanks and stuff like that do that, like concept stories. And so like Shield Wall itself just wants to copy that model. Like I don't really want to build up out the universe like through Shield Wall RPG. I just want that like concept stories. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like that we can use as like for a war game. I don't want to like I have other ideas
Right.
for an actual like RPG or something like that, or the metaverse. I'll talk that meta game thing um because I we follow each other on Twitter too, and that looked really interesting. Lots of going on there.
Yeah, and that's what I was actually going to talk about next. And the reason I brought up that thread again is because I feel like a lot of your frame and your illusions and analogies kind of go back to like what you're doing in the fictional space. So I just wanted to see like is that something you want to collaborate on? So it sounds like like we will focus on the operational, the organization building side. So back to that. We like I wrote down a list of like I've got individuals in mind, but as far as like organizations go, I wrote down metagame, game B, Meta Prime seems like he's building something, but it's still kind of small. We got
Yeah, I jumped into one of his spaces one time. I wasn't a speaker, I just jumped in as a listener, and I had to keep I was hotspot hopping, which happens a lot because I'm always jumping either from the cafe or to the university facility.
right.
Um, so I didn't like catch all of it, but I heard him talk a little bit, and he really sounded like he was like bangers. He was dropping bangers.
Yes, he's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a chat. I've had a chat with him, and then I've had a chat with the creator of Metagame. And I was gonna say too, like Metagame, they just had a Meta conference that they organized in Croatia, and there were like 200, 300 people there. I mean, it's a really impressive what they're doing.
Nice.
And so out of these various organizations, so like obviously Shield Law and then the Natural Order that I'm building, and still the Natural Law Institute is kind of in this space, but a little bit separate probably. So out of these organizations, obviously they're kind of doing some different things, but there is a lot of overlap. And one of the things I'm thinking about is like who can be like the hub, who can be like the federative umbrella, or also where can I invest my time the most? And it seems like Metagame's got like some of the most momentum going on. So I am going to be investing in what they're doing a good bit. Um, and so it will be interesting to try to map the relations between the entities. Like you said, concentric circles are going to be some overlap. There's going to be some uniqueness, but that's
Mhm.
something I'll probably be looking forward to doing, as well as continuing to network to some of these individuals, like the couple of guys I met on Facebook, to see how we can continue to collaborate. So it's pretty exciting. There's growth on all fronts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you guys wanted to, like you could, it would be easy to operate under shield walls or like the Adol and Locos. Like we could all just have our own hyper sigils.
Right.
Like that would be, no problem. Because like the main thing with shield wall is it's not the popularity, it's the fact that as a cultural equation, it's just the best substrate for a group to operate on.
Right.
So the fact that some hyper sigils or Adolans will be more popular than others, like that's just a feature of the egregore. You know what I mean? I'm sure one day we'll have like one guy with millions of followers who's carrying, a few other guys, whatever. It'll just be various, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I will say one thing I noticed about Metagame is that I think a lot of where they're operating is like kind of the foundational layer, like in the technological layer.
Nice. See, eventually we're gonna have to integrate that anyways, because you're gonna want a social egregore that can actually hook up with the tech.
Exactly, and that's what I'm thinking, because they're like doing the actual Web3. Oh, whoopsie. Meeting ended. Dang Zoom. I gotta set up another one. You there? Hello, hello, hello. Oh, oh, I didn't actually join the audio. That was my fault.
Oh, there.
There we go.
Okay.
I wasn't paying attention to the meeting either. But anyway, I've probably got to go ahead and wrap up. But that's a good point to end on. Is that like yeah, the metagame, they're really developing a lot of that like Web3 and the DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. They're building a lot of that platform. But like you said, you need to still hook up to like the social and the cultural and explore some of these other angles. And so there's still a lot of room for federation and collaboration and so
Yeah,
it's pretty exciting.
it's the standard technical versus non-technical stuff, right? So I mean that's the
Yeah,
old Silicon Valley combo.
yeah, man. Yeah,
Never been there, obviously, but
I'll continue to like I just now kind of I'd seen their website before. But I'm gonna be checking that out more and getting involved over there. I'm gonna be continuing to just this network. But I am pretty excited to see what I feel like is a pretty cohesive like meta movement, parallel movement. And so I'm gonna be continuing to network and of course we'll keep you and Shillwall in the mix and find out how it all
nice.
relates together. And it'll be good.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. Lots of cooking. I see a lot of great stuff on Twitter. Honestly, it's tons of geniuses.
Yeah, man. Let me know if you see any people, because like I've been trying to shift my Twitter experience because my Twitter experience has become so like politically dr like dissonant right like NLI focus. I want to kind of like expand a little bit, like whether it's like some of the more meta accounts and
Yeah,
stuff.
our next chat we could talk about Twitter if you wanted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it'll
We
be
could
good
talk
to
about all the
maybe we
different
could
factions.
spotlight some different accounts and organizations and stuff to start continuing building this map of the meta space.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Hell yeah. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. Like I said, I didn't have too much time today. We're about to get ready for our next activity, but it's been a good chat. I probably will try to get it uploaded, and uh, and
Man,
we'll
I honestly, that was an awesome chat.
yeah, man. I'm impressed. That was I guess it would have been within the space of about 40 minutes. So we got some good stuff done as always. We'll chat again soon, I'm sure, and we'll keep in touch on Twitter and all of our various platforms, man.
Hell yeah, awesome, man. Thanks, I appreciate this.
Alrighty, cool deal. Talk to you soon, man. See ya.
Hey, peace out, bro.